Hello and welcome to day 81 of 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tom Nyback, and we are discussing black issues in America, um, oppression, slavery, white privilege, entitlement. The two things I want to keep in mind as we continue this year-long project is first part has two ideas behind it. One is, does the black mind of slavery prevail from generation to generation? Is it still continue to permeate black populations mentally, emotionally, through intuition, um, tradition, by whatever means? Is it continuing? And conversely, does the white mind of empowerment, entitlement, expectation of privilege, and preference in America prevail from generation to generation? Is it likewise passed on from generation to generation? Just all these kind of you understood subjects in both populations. And secondly, I have a burden for especially black Americans to understand how to discourse, discuss finances, um, in a much more educated way. If we can get more educated, articulate, understand financial systems in America, that'll be another tool we can have towards combating and turning this ship around, so to speak, for black Americans. I'm inspired by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. I've read 3 of his works. He's easy to find on YouTube, and if you have any inklings, any kind of paranoia about Americans' intentions towards you, if you are black, then this man's words may resonate. First book I read was A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. We come out of there heavily. Since it's a year-long project, you can thank a third of the year is going to come out of that book. Black Labor, White Wealth, we're kind of meandering through here for a couple days. Search for Power and Economic Justice. And one second, let me just situate here. And finally, Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson as well at powernomics.com, the Heritage Institute in DC. Can point you in the right direction as well. You see behind me, hashtag us twos, black women discoursing and having their conversations. There are some distinctions in issues between men and women. I can't get around that one. Black Enough, BLAGGENUF, is another space to communicate black folk, black issues, kind of a black Facebook. Let's see. It's the internet, it's the information age, so it's stuff like this is not hard to find. You can find exactly what you're looking for, whatever biases you have. I'm hoping that this project is more factual and not resting on my biases and my experiences in America. And also, we take a fictional look at slavery in America. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Mid-1800s, we check in and check on the life of a slave named Tom. We've just left off with kind of an episode in another slave's life named Eliza. She's fled her master with her little son Harry. She found out Harry is being sold. Her matriarchal protectiveness kicks in, and she runs off. So last we saw her, she's heading out into the wilderness of Ohio. Who knows what her fate was going to be, but we'll find out. Maybe a couple days we'll crack that book back open and see where the lives of slaves are at. I'm coming out of there. Specifically, it's a fictional work, but it has got a lot of factual roots in the dynamics that existed between slaves and masters here in America. Uh, it's actually starting out very clean. We haven't seen some of the horrors, brutality yet. We've just seen families messed with and little inconveniences. I wonder what Harriet's going to do later on in the book with articulating some of the uh, more gross encroachments on slave lives in America. We'll see. Tonight, though, we're coming out of black labor, white wealth, and yesterday's discussion was about conservatism and not a political bias either way, but conserving the status quo in America. Status quo for whites, status quo for blacks, and keeping that fixated. And we looked yesterday more at the mindset. Today we'll look at some of the devices, one device specifically that has continued for quite some time in America. Uh, but first, if you just walk around and see, you know, populations of like people do gather in specific areas, but if you go out into the common world, into the public world, go to the shopping mall, go to the theater, um, the metropolitan areas, you're going to see we're kind of immune to it, we're conditioned to it now, but I want you to look specifically for color in the populace. It's rare. The word minority is almost an understatement when it comes to recognizing any sense of color in the American population. It's you see, it's almost exactly proportional statistically as you would find in any census book. There's you go out there, there's a whole group of white people enjoying themselves, and there's a black person here or there or a family and whatnot. It's very common to see white folks with their children, um, and not so much black folks with newborn babies out in this populace, in this metropolitan populace, like as I'm describing. In my experience, maybe yours experience is different, and both are valid. Um, so it's few. I remember I was working at this construction site, just doing general cleanup labor. Hispanics all around, language, everything. Not bad people. And so one brother pushing a broom. We almost couldn't help but just to say, hey, what's up, and encourage each other, network, and see if we can throw out some opportunities for each other and whatnot, because we recognize, yeah, we're getting along, but there's a fierce battle raging, and something restrains white folks from just rising up and performing genocide on us. That's kind of the attitude I feel sometimes, but there's enough good white people, I'm going to say, to keep that kind of behavior in check. And in all honesty, in all fairness, uh, I have to occasionally give a shout out because blacks, we could not have crossed over to where we're at today, even as compromised a position as it is, without white help. So it's not all white people. In that Malcolm X movie with Denzel Washington, he doesn't. There's that part where he says, that he says the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He doesn't say that some white people are devils. He says all white people are devils. Well, that's not true. That's not the truth. You're not going to find that here. We're talking about institutions, generalities here. So anyway, get out once in a while and see. I've been out there. Where I labor, there's more. It's not a majority white population until you start looking at management. In my labor, I still work. I have a day job. I've not made it. And I hope I don't get too far from the truth if I do break through some financial barriers here in America. So I segue from this conservatism, this keeping a status quo. There's that percentage of white population wants to keep blacks hobbled financially, and today we're going to talk about keeping blacks as a numerical minority. This started and we can go back to slavery to trace some of this. What happened, and this happened before 1790, is that as the slave trade was heating up and reaching its peak, there, because of the influx of these human black machines building America, all this free labor coming in, the numbers rose to about a third of the population of the United States at that time was black, was slaves. Now that's problematic if the slaves ever got some courage, organized, and united, not just little John Browns here and Nat Turners here, but if a third of the population gets together as a group, whites would have had some serious issues to deal with, but that never happened for them. But in recognition of this, they started to slow down this influx of slaves, and there was more inbreeding anyway. But between the slave masters were producing their own workforce, through laying with their female slaves, using them as concubines and for sex and all that stuff. And there was a whole population rising up there anyway. But they didn't want to have this immigration of black folks coming in. And since 1790, when Congress passed the first Naturalization Law, declaring America to be a white nation, that was kind of the beginning of that was the line drawn by the white government to stem the tide. And I guess this is where my train of thought was going, is that it was the beginning of curtailing any black influx into America, the white nation. So that 1/3 population at its peak, at its height before 1790, had trailed off since then. Or it was around the 1750s was the peak of it. Now, what you're going to find, and we're coming out of Dr. Anderson's Black Labor, White Wealth, page 167. What you have to find is statistically, whites have a comfort level with black presence. And once that level gets breached, I'm talking about in communities as far as living, once once blacks reach a certain ratio, it reaches a critical mass, and you'll see whites fleeing the area. It's called white flight. But the only real, I mean, it happened all over this country, I'm sure, but Philadelphia is a great example, North Philadelphia, where as the black population grew and began to bulge, whites just exited, and they take the resources, a lot of economical means with them, and it cripples the community. And it's just very bad. You think about Detroit and any depressed area of Detroit, although Detroit is starting to have a comeback, which is another story. But for Philadelphia now, the whites leave North Philly, and there's a section called Northeast Philadelphia, and that's another big, predominantly white area, and blacks always have problems moving into that section of the city. They can expect their houses and sidewalks to be painted, and to get some overt persecution for moving into that area. So, but then now the ratio is 8%. 8% is what we find whites comfortable with. Eight blacks for every 100 whites. And then the critical mass seems to be around 15%. If you put 7 more blacks into the equation, whites struggle with that. So 15%, nearly half of the 1/3 that we talked about earlier, it kind of makes sense. So there's some mental disconnect there with white folks, with having a whole lot of black folks around. So back in 1840, the European immigration exploded. And with that influx, and I'm talking about, you think about Ellis Island stories, where they see the Statue of Liberty and stuff. I forget which arm it is, whatever. It's coming into New York Harbor and things like that, and all those glamorous stories. Well, those are boatloads of Europeans coming in, displacing blacks out of the communities and out of jobs. So it pushes blacks away, and they congregate into their own neighborhoods in response to this encroachment by Europeans. And Dr. Anderson gives some statistics further, about Europeans, specifically, then Jews, and he points out that in all cases, black immigration is either absolutely refused or seriously strangled, hindered, in light of all of this activity. And that's the way it always is. If you read the brief notes of today, you'll see also my concern about the census. He mentions the census in here, but I'm wondering if America's census is just to get an idea of where they are at. Where are the black people at, and where are they? Are they improving, getting worse, staying the same? Because to me, a census would be, you take a snapshot of a space and a situation, and my thought would be to improve, but we can't be naive and think that that's always the case. It's safe to believe that there are sectors, institutions in America that feel as though, okay, this group of black folks is doing better and whatnot and improving their community. Well, we need to adjust some tax laws. We need to maybe not support education and not put education dollars in there. You think about, and this is across the board. You see it especially in education. Um, Now, I have not been inside a school building or been privy to educational system. With the internet, that I'm sure that whole thing has transformed dramatically. But there was a time when even, uh, um, you know, America is touting that all things are being equal, yet black schools, are not getting the best equipment, the best books, and all that, where the white schools and the white neighborhoods are getting the best of the best. The teachers are adequately trained and compensated for their labor and things like that. But in distressed communities, the exact opposite is true. So my point about the census and my uh, paranoia and misgivings about the census is that it exposes the blacks. That they're giving their information willingly to organizations and the government that's not aggressively forwarding black growth concerns and issues. That's a serious problem to think about. All I have is a conspiracy theory right now. I don't have facts behind me. I've not done any statistical research, you know. But that would be, if I did, that would be the direction I would take, you know, based on the facts presented, gathered from census taking. What has been the change, if any, um, for uh, this community versus that community? You know, have you increased police presence rather than assuaging financial suffering? You know, police don't monitor and cruise gated neighborhoods, white communities, and things like that. Well, but they make their money and they keep that system going by finding fresh, impoverished, desperate people in these depressed and challenged, compromised communities and whatnot. Problem. Okay, I just had a little hiccup in my video there. I hope that did not prevail. Uh, this is the whole discussion is interesting because there was a time, I don't know what what the statistics are now, but Dr. Anderson asserts that the black birth rate was double that of whites. So blacks very sexually active. I get that. I think all people should be within reason. But the black birth rate doubled whites, but this immigration thing overwhelmed, still overwhelms the black population. They don't have to bring, they don't have to employ too many weird devices. They can just populate the black people out of existence out here and dilute the race. I'm not saying that pejoratively. I'm just saying, it's just natural as, this you bring two groups of people. I don't care what groups together. Eventually, they're going to mix and dilute the race. It's not a bad thing in my mind, though there's plenty of people who believe that is. Blacks historically, traditionally, have no refugee program. There's no, um, you look at some of the white populations, um, Europe, even the Baltics maybe, and you find them having easier access than even Asians, especially blacks. We got people still overloading rafts and boats trying to get to America. You know, but there's no real official policy. We do get African refugees, but the door is not wide open. You know, in these uh, areas of civil war and things like that, we don't have big ships and planes trucking people out of there into America. So he ends this little portion uh, about the population of blacks um, being compromised and challenged by immigration. He ends it by saying, us blacks need a plan, and 3 parts, no brainer. We need a collective public policy that we agree upon, a kind of nationalism that we live, that other groups live, the Asians, Hispanics, they live it. A tradition that we can lay hold on to, a fellowship to be had, something that can combat the proliferation of so much media on our phones and whatnot. Hispanics, we got the phones, everybody's distracted, engrossed in what that little phone in their hand can do, yet they still gather uh, on Sundays, on warm days. We're coming into spring now, and we're going to see these huge gatherings and barbecues of Hispanics. I don't know what black folks would do or have to do that. If coming together as a community collectively would be part of that answer. I don't know. But anyway, we need a public policy, whether we gather or not, of something to which we are dedicated and consistently passing on from generation to generation. So it's got to be specific where we want to go. Where do you want to go? Don't do the steps first. A great speaker, motivational speaker named Tony Robbins says, don't get caught up in the point by point process initially. That's not what you do first. Where you want to go. Then in the going there comes the solution. So where do we want to go first? Then finally, how to get there, what resources we need to gather and whatnot. So that's a little talk to kind of, we continue the conversation about conservatism, and one aspect of conservatism is keeping the black population very small, very non-threatening. You hear me talk about that a lot. Too much black is a threat. I remember I was renting this room uh, from this lady. I think I talked about her yesterday, but anyway, the room had no windows. And one day I had come home, and there was some work being done up the street, and we lost power. And that was the most blackness I experienced in my life. It was deep black. You could turn out the lights almost in any room, and you'll perceive some emanation from somewhere, even the fuzziest kind, but there were no windows. It was in the basement in the corner, and no light, and I'd never experienced that before. I began to get fearful, but it was more almost disorienting. I almost began to float in that blackness. It only lasted for a moment before I started reaching for the door, for the monsters coming out. That's the blackness. So the blackness may be an inherently human phenomenon. Who knows what it is? But whites don't want a whole lot of blacks around, and they especially don't want those numbers to be going over 13 to 15%. That's a kind of a critical mass for white folks, and they get real jittery when those ratios are upset at those numbers and levels. Oh, that's day 81. We're moving right along here, people. Oh, thank you so much for hanging out. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see what we can come up with. Take it easy.